Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at Venezuela and think this is merely a story between the United States and Latin America, that is a serious mistake. The truth is, this is the opening move in a chain of plans. President Donald Trump prepared carefully not just to target Caracas, but to send a direct signal to President Xi Jinping. Donald Trump has not tried to hide that intention. In his view, Venezuela, under the stubborn leadership of Nicolás Maduro, with back-channel ties to Iran and China, was the first chess piece that had to be removed. After that would come Iran, and after Iran, the name many have been waiting for, Beijing. Xi Jinping understands this is no longer a war of words within the boundaries of diplomacy. This is a warning delivered through military force. All it takes is a single American missile launched from the Western Pacific, crossing a chain of forward bases and striking targets linked to Iran or Venezuela, and that becomes a declaration that the United States is redefining boundaries of global influence. This is no longer a strategy on paper. It is an operational plan in the real world, step by step, hitting the outer edges and tightening toward the center. Every target neutralized does not only send a signal to Tehran or Caracas, it sends a cold message to the core of power in Zhongnanhai. Washington does not need to speak into a camera. What it needs is action behind the curtain. And once the power clock starts running backward, the entire bloc aligned against the United States has to ask itself, when will Beijing face a real war? Remember this, energy corridors, strategic sea lanes, and military supply chains, every one of them is under the observation range of the U.S. Department of Defense. Xi Jinping can keep controlling the domestic media front, but the Pentagon's early warning system has been flashing danger signals for a long time. In a move that shook the world, President Donald Trump suddenly posted a statement that sent shockwaves through intelligence networks and militaries across the globe. What stunned people even more was that only minutes later, multiple strategic monitoring systems shifted into red alert status. At the same time, tactical maps of Venezuela were updated, continuously simulating troop movements and airstrike scenarios with detailed precision. Links in the emergency response system were reviewed, and one question rose clearly: does President Trump ever rest? With Trump, he is not only the head of the country, he is a commander-in-chief who never stops. Every time he speaks, even if it is just a simple status update, it is not merely sharing. It functions like an indirect order. Venezuela had not even had time to process what was happening when the chain of military reactions began moving. The post went out in the early hours local time, an unusual moment to deliver a strategic message. But what shocked the world most was what came next. Trump confirmed he had received a comprehensive report and called a press conference for 11 a.m. the same day. That action meant the entire U.S. military system had been activated overnight. President Trump clearly did not sleep. He read the report, absorbed the situation, and made decisions while most of the world was still asleep. This is no longer the behavior of a typical politician. It is the classic pattern of a commander directing a campaign in the middle of the night while most nations are still preparing to welcome the new year. In that context, the order to launch the operation was issued, and if Donald Trump moved that way, then the biggest question becomes, who is next after Venezuela and Iran? A short but heavy statement was issued from Mar-a-Lago. President Donald Trump confirmed that the United States was launching a large-scale military operation targeting Venezuela's government directly. The specific target, President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, early information from U.S. Intelligence sources indicated both had been captured and expelled in an operation tightly coordinated between U.S. Special Operations Forces and U.S. law enforcement agencies. President Trump emphasized that all details would be officially released at a press conference at 11 a.m. the same day at the Mar-a-Lago resort, where he was temporarily staying during the holiday. What matters is that this announcement did not come from the State Department, did not come from the Pentagon, and did not come through a spokesperson. This was a direct written order carrying the official signature of President Donald Trump. It did not only reflect the forceful return of a wartime commander-in-chief, it sent a decisive signal that the United States would no longer remain patient in endless negotiations. The United States chose to act on New Year's Eve while the entire world was counting down to the new year. President Trump did not celebrate. He signed approval for a military operation that forced the entire U.S. media system to change plans, cancel vacations, and rush back into newsrooms. No one believes that timing was random. Clearly launching the operation at the exact moment of the year's transition was a strategic. For Nicolás Maduro, it was a brutal New Year's gift, a clear warning and punishment from the White House. Meanwhile, the international community, especially Western democracies, received the news with relief. But what matters more is the lesson underneath justice does not appear naturally. It does not arrive simply because of prayers or diplomatic meetings. Justice has to be established through concrete action, through decisive voices, through armed power if necessary, and through decisions that cannot be delayed. President Trump did not rest, and Venezuela learned that the hardest way possible. Videos recorded by local residents began spreading at lightning speed across social platforms. The images from the operation site were unmistakable American AH-64 Apache attack helicopters flying low-skimming rooftops, then suddenly firing on strategic Venezuelan military targets. Some clips filmed from hillsides showed entire areas erupting into intense flames after precise strikes. Other footage shot from very close range captured rotor noise, the scream of launched rockets, and thunderous explosions in the night. This was not simulated footage. This was a real military operation with Venezuelan civilians as living witnesses inside a moment of fate. At this point, all rumors were replaced by proof that could not be denied. More video continued flooding out of Venezuela, showing precision strikes on key locations, including, reportedly, the residence of Venezuela's defense minister, who was said to be unreachable afterward. What stunned military analysts was the total silence of Venezuela's air defenses. Not a single surface-to-air missile launch, no fighter jets scrambling. The entire response force was neutralized within the first minutes. Some online observers also noted the presence of U.S. transport helicopters on scene. That would mean special operations forces had inserted, and the likelihood is high that they captured President Maduro and his wife at his villa. This was a precision decapitation strike carried out with a level of quiet that felt almost unbelievable. For anyone still doubting the reach of U.S. military intervention, this was the final answer. No large-scale war was needed. No occupation zone had to be established. With only a helicopter task force, a government could collapse in an instant. Few expected the operation to unfold during the first holiday of the new year. Some reports said that only hours before the raid, Maduro was still on state television denying any responsibility for drug trafficking along the border. He accused Colombia of being the producer of cocaine, claiming Venezuela was merely the victim. But President Trump did not respond with words. The United States countered with action, and that action was the capture of Venezuela's sitting president on his own soil. This was no longer a diplomatic warning. This was the end of a dynasty. Caracas burned on New Year's Eve. But what about the United Nations? Still no statement, still no emergency meeting. Everything remained silent, coldly silent. In contrast to the quiet of international organizations, the first reaction came from Venezuela's neighbor, Colombia. Unable to stay neutral, as a major shock unfolded right at its border, Colombia's president immediately issued a condemnation of unilateral military action by President Donald Trump's administration. He warned that this could push the entire region into a chain of geopolitical instability unlike anything seen since the post-Cold War era. This was no longer debate within diplomacy. One side had fired, one side protested, and the rest remained silent, calculating. But the geopolitical spiral did not stop here. Only a month earlier, when the United States began tightening pressure around Venezuela, backlash from parts of the international diplomatic world and left-leaning media surged. Warnings echoed everywhere: follow international law, follow procedures. But after years of futile negotiations, from closed-door meetings to public conferences, from hundreds of joint statements to humanitarian resolutions, what actually improved Venezuela remained in chaos. Hunger, repression, crime, and mass migration continued. When diplomatic procedure delivered no results, President Trump chose a different path, ending it through action. In the strategic scenarios prepared at the White House, Donald Trump fully ruled out the prospect of a prolonged war. No second Iraq, no complex nation-building model, no plan to internationalize Venezuela into a proxy battlefield. The lessons of the past were applied completely. This time, the objective was clear: target the leader as an individual, do not destroy the country, preserve infrastructure, but remove the command center. President Trump chose a strategy similar to Israel's military style: not broad strikes, but precise strikes, not targeting soldiers, but targeting the decision maker. According to strategic advisors, he absolutely could have eliminated Maduro on the spot. But the option chosen was to capture and expel him. This was a politically calculated choice, avoiding the creation of a martyr symbol and avoiding igniting anti-US sentiment among the Venezuelan public. Trump did not need Venezuela as a strategic territory to occupy. What he needed was to ensure Venezuela no longer threatened regional order and U.S. national security. A strike described like surgery cut directly into the core of power without destroying the entire system. After removing the threat, U.S. forces withdrew immediately. No staying, no rebuilding. This was something rarely seen in traditional military campaigns. Under President Joe Biden, Venezuela became a nightmare on the United States southern border. Waves of illegal migration from South America surged across the border, with a large share coming from Venezuela, creating a crisis unlike anything seen before. Worse, the Maduro government refused to accept its citizens who were being deported back home. The result: thousands of people stuck inside the United States, no papers, no legal solution, and no ability to be returned. So this action was not only an international intervention, it was a reset of the rules. For President Trump, this was not only punishment, it was a new strategic model, a Godfather-style approach, decisive action without asking anyone's permission. Every step was carefully calculated. No spread out deployment, no getting bogged down, just the right target, the right timing, and the right blow. Many experts agree that in the first half of the 21st century, three pillars will reshape global order: the United States, Israel, and Japan. And in the emerging structure, the next hotspot is Taiwan. But that is another story. Back to Venezuela, the core message is very clear. Donald Trump does not pursue old-style war. No need to send massive ground forces, no need to spend months to reach a result. The new method is to identify the source of instability and deal with it directly. This approach is described as the most humane among modern military options. Why? Because it does not require mass killing of soldiers, does not require destroying cities, and most importantly, does not require trading away American lives. Whether they are American, Russian, or Ukrainian soldiers, human life is valuable. That is why capturing the leader is the least bloody, fastest, and most effective approach. The message from Caracas was not only aimed at Maduro's government, it was a direct warning to Beijing and Moscow. If countries continue allowing their leaders to engage in breaking international order, the United States will not wait for resolutions or consensus councils. It will strike not at armies, but at those who hold real power. While the world was still debating legal procedure, the operation on the ground had already ended. On the morning of the 3rd, the skies above Caracas witnessed something unprecedented in the country's history. A formation of U.S. Army Apache helicopters flew straight into the center of the city without facing any resistance. No sirens, no air defense activation, no fighter jets taking off in response. Defense systems previously supplied by Russia were completely paralyzed. MiG fighters purchased earlier were nowhere to be seen. Everything was reduced to appearances, a hollow shell of defense that could not stop an operation planned and executed with near-perfect precision. Footage filmed by civilians showed a raw reality. Maduro's government had spent years focusing on suppressing civilians and controlling the country through internal force. But when confronted by a real superpower, it deployed no effective resistance. This was no longer military tactics. It was political surgery, removing the control apparatus of a state, sinking into comprehensive failure. South America was once a relatively stable region in the last century. Now, it has become a focal point of poverty, dictatorship, drug trafficking, and refugee waves spilling into U.S. territory. The cost of allowing radical left forces and transnational criminal organizations to dominate the region has become a national security burden the United States can no longer ignore. With this operation, President Donald Trump did not only target an individual, he cleared a path for a new regional security model. A military operation might be labeled unilateral, but in reality, it was a strategic response calculated long in advance. President Trump's strategic view is clear. Nicolás Maduro was not merely a dictator. He was the root cause of one of the most severe security crises threatening the United States. Through weak governance, Maduro drove the nation toward collapse. Venezuelans lost faith in the future and fled north in massive numbers. The result, the U.S. border became a flashpoint not only for migration, but for security, smuggling, and social disorder. Washington had repeatedly tried diplomacy, from proposals for economic assistance to requests for cooperation on deportations. Everything was placed on the table. But when negotiations failed again and again and results never came, the only remaining option was action. And in Trump's strategic thinking, that action did not require many words. It required one message. Any country that directly impacts U.S. security and cannot control itself will pay a price, not through theory, but through concrete consequences. As for China, long viewed as a strategic partner and behind-the-scenes ally of the Maduro regime, why did it remain silent through the upheaval? The answer lies in Beijing's core policy interests come first. When Venezuela weakened to the point it could no longer produce strategic value or meaningful economic benefit, public Chinese support became unnecessary. Beijing's silence is also a message. China is recalculating interests, weighing risks, and does not want to be directly entangled in a confrontation that could damage its global position. That silence does not mean China disrespected Maduro. It means Beijing did not want to bet its geopolitical future on a country Washington had warned openly and clearly. Meanwhile, the European Union, often critical of unilateral military campaigns, responded strongly this time, broadly opposing U.S. action in Venezuela. But U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio responded with a sharp argument that forced many to reconsider. You buy our weapons to use in the Russia-Ukraine war, but we are not allowed to use our own weapons in Venezuela. What kind of justice is that? In a step that left the world holding its breath, Marco Rubio did not merely issue a diplomatic statement. He delivered a direct accusation of hypocrisy in global policy. The United States was no longer patient with meaningless criticism. At the White House, the argument was made decisively. If the United Nations cannot act quickly and produce binding results, the United States has full authority to use power to protect vital interests, especially against threats tied to drugs, illegal migration, and border destabilization, not just empty words. Right after the Caracas operation, multiple rapid strikes were carried out at sea, targeting drug trafficking routes and strategic Venezuelan ports. Images spreading across media channels showed this was not only firepower, it was a complete display of a new military doctrine act, first negotiate later. It was a cold declaration of self-defense and a redefinition of American-style justice in the 21st century. President Donald Trump chose a response that was impossible to predict. No summit, no warning, no request to the Security Council. The action unfolded inside Caracas with a speed and effectiveness that left the world stunned. Every step felt like a calculated Godfather move, everything arranged in advance, leaving no room for reaction. Strategically, this was not an ordinary military operation. Venezuela, a nation holding one of the largest oil reserves on Earth, has now become a hotspot where power is being restructured. As the Maduro regime collapses, not only can oil production be reopened, but the entire global energy balance shifts, easing pressure from conflict zones, pushing oil prices higher. But more importantly, this was the rebirth of the Monroe Doctrine, a direct warning to China and Russia. The Americas are a strategic influence zone that cannot be violated. Any interference will be stopped through military power. And when President Trump declared the era of proxy war games was over, do not think silence means safety. That was a signal shaking the entire global chessboard. The Venezuela operation showed that the United States not only has the right, but has the capability and will use military power when necessary. Russian-supplied air defenses were neutralized in under 30 minutes. Senior commanders were captured on the spot. The combat network was completely paralyzed. A full collapse, prepared in detail in advance under Godfather Trump. And this was only the beginning. U.S. intelligence had already signaled after Venezuela, the next name being discussed is Iran. And with Xi Jinping struggling under the Belt and Road Initiative's crisis, while President Vladimir Putin remains stuck in Ukraine, America's blow is not just regional, it is global preemption. The message is clear. If anyone interferes with U.S. interests in the Americas, in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific, or destabilizes the Taiwan Strait, the consequence will be paid in blood and steel. No warnings needed. No statements needed. No international conferences needed. At this point, our program will pause here. Leave your views and join the discussion with us.